To the regular Friday meeting of the City Club of Portland, I'm Jim Westwood, your president. We have several new members in City Club every week. This week, only one of our new members has been able to attend the luncheon, and she's here today. I'd ask her to stand, and please help me welcome her to City Club. It's Karen Hartford, Director of Healthcare Services, Medical Personnel Pool, Incorporated. Welcome to City Club, Karen. Next Friday, July 19th, our guest speaker will be Oregon Secretary of State Phil Kiesling, speaking on what can be done to restore public confidence in government. He will discuss the problem of public distrust in government and will propose changes to make the political process more accessible and accountable to those who feel powerless to make a difference. That will be here in the Benson Hotel, Mayfair Room, next Friday. Phil Kiesling, Oregon Secretary of State. Thursday, July 18th, a new member reception at the City Club office from 5 p.m. to 6:30. Portland City Commissioner Earl Blumenauer will be our guest and will deliver a brief talk. If you're a new member, please plan to attend to meet City Club leaders and to hear about volunteer opportunities. Please RSVP to Debbie McCadden at the club office for that Thursday new member reception. Please note also that this week's bulletin requests volunteers to serve on a research study committee on the subject of parking in downtown Portland. If you're interested, I encourage you to complete the form in the bulletin and send it to the club office. The research study function is really a vital part of what we do, and City Club's mission of service to the community is not really carried out unless we have good research studies. Members willing to serve on those committees are certainly a strong part of what City Club does and needs to do. Our board host today, seated at the head table, is Patty Bedient, President-elect of City Club, and a partner with Arthur Anderson and Company. She, of course, has the privilege of asking the first question of our speaker. Second question will be asked by Mark Anderson, Chair of the Arts and Culture Standing Committee. We open the meeting up to questions from City Club members in the audience at the close of our speaker's prepared remarks. Written questions will be asked as time permits, and there will be a microphone on the floor as usual. Forms are on your table, as also usual, for written questions. Please hold them up at the close of the speaker's address so that staff can gather those questions and bring them up to the head table. As you may notice that due to scheduling problems in the Soviet Union, the Ave Sol Latvian choir originally scheduled for today had to be canceled. We certainly owe a hearty thank you to today's speaker and member of the club, Bill Crane, who was able to step in with the fine presentation we're about to hear. He may not speak Latvian, but he is fluent in French. Questions addressed to him in that language, I'm sure, will be responded to, and he and his questioner will understand. The rest of us will have to guess. Portland certainly is doing something right to attract a person like today's speaker, William C. Crane. He's been a Portlander for about a year now. He is Executive Director of the Portland Baroque Orchestra, and as I mentioned, he is also a member of City Club. Bill is a person of varied talents, I suppose foremost a musician, but he's also a translator of French, not just a speaker of French. He's a philanthropist and fundraiser, a teacher, an administrator, and I am told a host of dinner parties for which he serves as head chef as well and fulfills both roles admirably. He has served as Associate Director of Annual Giving for the American Symphony Orchestra League in Washington, D.C. He has been an organist and choir master of major churches in the Washington area and served as president of the Board of Trustees of the Georgetown Symphony Orchestra. Quite a resume for someone as young as Bill, and with a few gray hairs, I think I can say that. What are you, Bill, 39, is that right? He hit Portland like a good scherzo movement, I think. He's jolted people out of the comfortable established patterns in a way that invites their involvement to what he is dashing off to achieve. He has energy that's boundless, and he has a lot of good thoughts, I think, for us today on corporate involvement in the funding of nonprofit organizations. That takes on a vital new urgency in a period of contraction in governmental support and of economic uncertainty in the lives of many traditionally generous individuals. Is it a responsibility of corporations, as citizens of the communities they inhabit, to help underwrite the social services that private nonprofits fill? Well, for some insights on the answer to that question, I present to you William C. Crane.
Thank you very much. I think all of you know that when I was asked to replace the choir, it was on 5 minutes decision time and 25 minutes to write a prospectus. So the first thing I'd like to tell you is I've changed my title a bit. When I reviewed corporate philanthropy, option or responsibility, I thought it was a little bit en garde. So I've changed it to partnerships in filling a community's needs. Thank you so much for this opportunity to address the City Club. I'm doing this a bit backwards in as much as I'm a brand new member of the club, new to the program committee, and if the truth be known, I've yet to attend my new member reception. So this is doubly an honor to have been invited by the program committee chair, Kathy Oxborough, to fill in at the last minute. I'd just like to remark, because I'm very sensitive about things between artists and governments, I would like to say about the Ave Sol Choir that their cancellation was beyond their control because of problems with the transfer of visas from the Immigration and Naturalization Service to our embassy in Moscow, and that prevented them from using complimentary airline passage, which would have put them on a schedule to match ours. I have reports of their concertizing elsewhere, and I assure you it is our loss that they're not here. Well, besides thanking Kathy for this opportunity to address my new favorite club, I'd also like to acknowledge publicly the clear, concise, excellent work of Nancy Hedin, our executive director, whose calm in the face of anything is something we've come to depend upon. I have several colleagues who helped me in preparing these remarks in a short time. Don Roth of the Oregon Symphony and Robert Bailey of the Portland Opera. Sorry, Robert, he's here. Judith Rameli of Portland State and Linda McGee of Chamber Music Northwest were all very helpful in helping me understand more deeply the picture of the arts. Bill Bulick and Donna Mulroney of the Metropolitan Arts Commission are my constant counselors, and a distinguished executive director, Ann Mason, of Arts Plan 2000, a comprehensive planning document which, as you all know, has been underway for more than a year now, to see where we're headed as an artistic and cultural community, and offered lots of help too. Mary Yeager, a colleague at Mount St. Joseph Retirement and Extended Care Center, offered much counsel in the preparation of these remarks, and since I'm still a little bit a transplanted Easterner, they all helped me Portlandize much of my opinion, and to them I'm very grateful. I'd just like to take this podium for a second and say something about the Portland Baroque Orchestra. The brochure of our season is on your tables. I'm a pushy guy, and I'd like you to know we exist, and there you are. Well, in these remarks, I would like to put forth a thesis that we, the proprietors of profit and nonprofit institutions in this city, are all striving for the same end, a better Portland. But our model lacks certain key elements. As well, I would like to relate to you certain personal stories of philanthropy in the hopes of hooking your interest in what, for me, is a passionate matter. A few statistics on where we stand in relation to national standards will be necessary. And as well, I believe that an analysis of the profit-nonprofit relationship in Portland based on current psychological models will lend some insight. Finally, sensing that no one in this audience would argue that we all seek a better Portland, I would like to offer some concrete suggestions about forging new alliances. First, let me begin with a tale. When I was 7 years old, hence still at that stage where I believed everything my daddy told me, I overheard him once remarking on how some buddy at the airline overhaul base where he worked had had his life saved because of a transfusion. My father explained to me, you see, that it was possible after someone had had an accident or surgery that you could take blood out of one person and put it in the other hurt person. I quickly told my father to stop teasing me. One does not take blood out of one person and put it in another. Yes, he counseled me. One has to take a certain care of type, but there were easy tests for that. And for most people, it was easy to match up just the right kind. I pressed him, for this to me was simply too marvelous. In a word, at the age of 7, I had my world reordered because giving, which prior to that moment had for this 7-year-old been a matter of sharing toys with playmates begrudgingly, became a miraculous process in which part of me could literally save another person's life. I was distraught and thrilled for days. No doubt I drove my father crazy questioning him about it. How do they get it in the other person, and so forth. To this day, 32 years later, I consider the possibility of blood transfusions to be one of the most astounding of all possible miracles of creation. Of course, in our modern time, they are as common as coffee breaks, as are the transplantation of whole organs and organ systems, and unfortunately, now the topic of many news stories as we deal with the modern dilemmas of the health of the blood supply. But the wonder of that original revelation has never left me. It was only 4 years later in my life that a neighbor girl regained her sight through one of the earliest corneal transplants. My response to that miracle was to march myself down to the local Lions Club and sign up for donation. The card required notarization, and the notary public called my dad because I was only 11. But I would hope that these were among the worst trials I gave my father. That early response, which remains visceral with me, was, I believe, one common to a greater or less extent in all of us and in our institutions. The possibility of responding to a perceived need of the community. Our common humanity becomes most exposed, most potent, most responsive in the face of disaster. All of us will remember images of well-dressed professionals risking life and limb in the collapse of the Bay Bridge between Oakland and San Francisco during the earthquake there a couple of years ago. More importantly, all of us will remember the media and support network telephone lines being deluged with people wanting to know how they could help. We arise to our best in such circumstances. It is only the mildness of a moment that makes this human instinct less obvious. The opportunity to contribute to the well-being of a community is the best of privileges. What other opportunity do we have to share so widely with fellow citizens and, more importantly, our progeny, the good that comes our way? We all want the best for ourselves and those around us. In any community, Portland included, given the right setting, such as the City Club, we can hear the ongoing dialogue of concerned citizens identifying the needs of that community. Housing for the homeless, shelter for the abused, food for the hungry in body and spirit, art, music, and theater that thrill and restore our sense of balance and propriety, foundations that will employ those who will defend the embattled and defenseless, places for health care and healing, homes to live in when we are old. There are people who arise and create institutions which arise to meet the perceived needs of a community. They do this without the expectation of great financial reward, and typically they don't get it. And they seek to restore rightfully to the community much of what the marketplace necessarily takes away. These people and institutions are the nonprofits of a community. My thesis is this: a nonprofit properly comes into being because it arises to meet a perceived need of the community, because it fulfills needed services and goods for that community. Our society exempts it from paying taxes and trusts it to apply the appropriate resources to solve the problem to which it devotes itself. The people involved in this kind of an enterprise hold a public trust. Indeed, they are called trustees. We could also spell it Trusties, trustees. When an organization comes into being which does not honestly exist to meet real community needs, as opposed to stroking the egos of the founders, whatever their zeal, it does not deserve to exist. Let me say that again. When an organization comes into being which does not honestly exist to meet real community needs, as opposed to stroking the egos of the founders, whatever their zeal, it does not deserve to exist, and usually does not for much longer than about 6 or 7 years. I mean this whether the great thing that the XYZ nonprofit is offering to the community is perfectly played Baroque music on 18th century authentic instruments, or counseling to a particular subset of the disenfranchised. But that nonprofit, which does exist because the community calls for it, and I would argue here that we need to hear Brandenburg number 5, and you'll have a great chance in October with a hot harpsichordist, my band, Sue Jensen, played thrillingly by real live musicians who live and teach in our town, that we need to provide some answers to teenagers whose luck has run out after rough childhoods, that we need parks with magnificent old trees to fall in love underneath. That nonprofit, which exists because the community calls for it, is struggling to make this a better place to live, just like their prophet brothers and sisters, that we are not nearly as opposite in philosophy as we think we are, and those nonprofits deserve our financial support. Nonprofit, you know, does not mean no profit. Our most typical attitude about those who enter the career path of administering nonprofits is that they are somehow those who could not cut it in the rough and tumble of the real business world. You and I know that to be false. Yet, while all of us in the charitable world are saying, "Oh my God, wingtips," the corporate side is thinking, "Oh my God, Birkenstocks." The savvy required for the successful administration of a nonprofit institution is much like that required for business. Just the technical rules are different. More importantly, though, it is in the very nature of these two kinds of institutions that the big difference is that by their very nature, nonprofits do not have the possibility of generating budget balancing revenues based on the creation and sale of goods and services. Let me say that twice. More importantly, though, it is in the very nature of these two kinds of institutions that the big difference is that by their very nature, nonprofits cannot and do not have the possibility of generating budget balancing revenues based on the creation and sale of goods and services. Our reason to exist is to provide a needed service to the community, one which often includes a clientele that could not possibly pay our real costs. The profit sector, by its very nature, on the other hand, generates revenue, must generate revenue to keep its shareholders happy based on the sale of goods and services which it hopes the community will buy. In its very design, the profit institution comes into being to generate revenue and along the way provides goods and services. The nonprofit seeks to provide services and hopes to gain sufficient revenue to the task. Because a society needs many things, and certainly both kinds of institutions to provide them, we must come to see the relationship of these two kinds of institutions as a symbiosis. That is to say, dependent upon each other for success and well-being, rather than sycophant, e.g., one taking all its strength from the other. If we examine this relationship, this construct, from the psychological framework of transactional analysis, a framework popular a decade or so ago, we find that in the popular imagination, the relation of charitable institutions to profit-making businesses is often one of parent-child. One where we, the orchestras, hospices, women's centers, and whale-saving clubs, keep asking them, the retailers, manufacturers, and conglomerates, for an allowance. Isn't it time that we enter into adult relationships? That is to say, relationships in which we acknowledge one another's benefits and needs honestly, and really get on to the business of making this the best community in the nation. I know. I hear the cries of, but there are so many of you out there asking us for help. How are we supposed to choose? The only answer that I can offer you is one that they don't teach in business school, and they didn't teach me in music school either, and that is, do not give money to any nonprofit organization in the metropolitan area, especially the arts, and most especially musical organizations. But rather, choose to invest in that thing which is most exciting, most putting you back in touch with real values of the many options before you. Making this choice as an individual is easier than as an institution. If you love Bach, it's my band. Singers, it's the opera. If you are concerned about the alarming number of homeless and disenfranchised people in our community, the Burnside Project's Blanchet House and Northwest Pilot Project all await you. The list goes on quite long, actually. As institutions, the choosing is more difficult only because we typically approach it from the wrong end of the telescope. Companies fund through small matching grants the passions of their individual employees, or worse, excuse the whole company from any kind of genuine corporate philanthropy because once a year management allows the United Way to come in and solicit individual employees. Sometimes the list will seem coherent enough that a corporate ethos becomes clear. And in Portland, many of our best companies now focus their support in order to accomplish good. But I would propose to you that a new beginning focus for any company, a new way of thinking, for a company large or small, might be to acknowledge that we all want a great city. That with all that means, that we are willing to participate in making this a successful city, that we commit mind, heart, and money to doing so. Money, the thing you can't talk about. Money to doing so. That there are colleagues out there holding the public trusts, and when we approach them adult to adult, rather than waiting for them to come to us parent to child, those priorities will become clear. This brings me to the most daring of my remarks. Had I had time to research it, I would give you precise statistics and an impenetrable grid of economic realities, but lacking that, let me ask you to take it on faith, that if we were to take all the revenue generated by business in this metropolitan area and there are officially 35,000 businesses in the metropolitan area. If we took all that revenue and applied 0.5% of it to the goals of the bona fide, worthy nonprofits of this community, we would nearly balance the budget of all of them. Mind you, I am certainly not the right man to stand before you and chastise. Among other things, I depend on corporate support, and my board president is here. Were I that man, I would not want to, because unlike many of my colleagues in the presenting arts community, absolutely the aforementioned excluded, I do not think the corporate community in Portland is parsimonious. In fact, I find it generous for what it believes needs to be done. What is lacking, in my opinion, is an understanding of what we're all trying to accomplish. It's wingtips to Birkenstocks again. We have failed from both sides to form partnerships, to engage each other sufficiently in the meaningful dialogue that helps us to understand how we benefit each other. Here are some of those hard statistics. We will all remember that in the early years of the Reagan administration, that there was an aggressive campaign to get the government out of the business of funding charitable organizations, with the hopes expressed by the president himself that the corporate community would jump in and help the local community. To aid this goal, laws were changed allowing that corporations may give up to 10% of their pre-taxed earnings to nonprofits. That is still the law, and of course, this is one crowd that I don't need to tell. This arrangement has been a colossal failure. Corporate giving in America to this day amounts to very slightly less than 5% of all philanthropy, the other 10% being foundation, another 10% being foundations, and the remaining 85% being from individuals. Corporate giving in America to this day amounts to very slightly less than 5% of all philanthropy. And while corporations still have that 10% tax advantage, their giving averages out to less than 2% per annum. A very few, only 6% nationwide, ever give more than $500 at a time. The bigger companies, of course, give more, with 50 of the very largest corporations, Texaco supporting the Metropolitan Opera, for instance, comprise 1/2 of total corporate philanthropy nationwide. Of all corporate dollars being given in America to any nonprofit activities, only 50 companies are giving half of that money. Parenthetically, let me remark, the giving statistics for all sectors in Portland, individual, corporate, and foundation, are just slightly under national levels. Where nationally business picks up about 5% of the philanthropy check, in Portland it's only about 3%. What is lacking specifically in this model is the understanding that the nonprofit community, with its orchestras and art galleries, contraceptive counseling services, soup kitchens, and beach cleaning committees, is providing to the corporate community those things which draw the best people with their excellent skills and high conscientiousness, as well as their pocketbooks, to this place. This is a good thing to invest in. I've only lived here a year, and already I don't want anyone else to come to Oregon. But if we do let a few more in, and I would suggest that we have a sensitivity test administered by the governor, I want to be sure that they're the kind of folks who will appreciate and value the magnificence of this city. So if the nonprofits of our community are filling the needs we have, and equally filling the needs which will make us have better business communities, let's support them. If we're not, a pox upon us. Let me relate another tale. This one is from the 4 years immediately prior to moving to Portland that I was an active volunteer caring for the dying at the Whitman Walker Clinic in Washington, D.C., named for Walt Whitman, poet, and Mary Walker, the first female American surgeon. I offer this tale as a powerful example of what even a modest investment of corporate money can do when coupled with a nonprofit institution that has its mission straight. Now 16 years old, the Whitman Walker Clinic is the gay clinic of D.C., founded as these things always are, on the dreams of a few fond thinkers. The clinic began life in a church basement in Georgetown to serve the gay and lesbian community in the areas of alcoholism, social disease, and counseling. Beginning with a volunteer administrator, at 5 years old, there were perhaps a dozen employees, and it was still known as the gay clinic of the city, and its base of support was entirely within that gay community. At about that time, a new disease appeared on the horizon, which by now has affected somehow the lives of nearly every American, but in those days was thought a passing thing. It affected gay men mostly, and so Whitman Walker stepped in to provide appropriate social services for those first affected. Little did those founders think that one day AIDS would be the scourge on the earth that it is now. When I left Washington, D.C. 1 year ago to move to Portland, I resigned from my volunteer responsibilities at Whitman Walker, where in 4 years of service I had cared hands-on and buried 38 patients, and had served 1 year on the Major Gifts Committee of the Development Office. Whitman Walker, you see, by last year had grown to an agency with a budget of $8.5 million and comprised a community of 1,800 active volunteers supervised by 129 employees, caring on a daily basis for 1,200 patients citywide. By the time I left, we were losing 10 patients a week and gaining 13 new ones. I do not need to tell you that the colleagues with whom I worked were amongst the most courageous, valiant people I might ever hope to meet again. Many were also pains in the neck. There were no angels there. And what began as a community of lesbians and gay men came to be a community of grandmothers, dads, straight yuppies, women lawyers in high heels, Hispanic school teachers, and gay men and lesbians, and who knows who else. You see, Whitman Walker's clientele over those years came to be a clientele which by nearly 30% was non-gay, non-white, non-affluent, and we changed our charter to meet the needs of our community. Skill levels were astonishing amongst our volunteers. I now know more about law, Social Security disability regulations, fighting with doctors, social workers, undertakers, and myriad other grim things than you might ever imagine, and I certainly won't tell you. What I came to realize one day as I was again coordinating the disparate efforts of yet another team of physicians, social workers, clergy, and clinic staff, all of whom were being handsomely paid, to attempt to provide coherent care to one of my patients was that I was saving somebody thousands of dollars, and that my other 1,799 colleague volunteers were doing the same. It suddenly dawned on me that I was not merely playing nursemaid to another sick individual, but that we were arising to meet a gripping need of our city, which had been visited by a plague. We were enabling those with professional skills to get on with their tasks of preventing and dealing with this awful disease at the lowest costs, monetary and human, possible, and that was something worth asking them to invest in. When I went back to the development committee and explained that we, volunteers, wanted partners in helping to pay for administration that would get the volunteers back on the front lines where it was happening, suddenly it started making sense to the business community. There is now a vast body of committed corporations, from supermarkets to manufacturers, who support the clinic's caregiving work with unrestricted funds. Whitman Walker continues to struggle with ever-mounting costs because they have taken on what history will prove to be the greatest scourge in centuries. But at least now, the community that they are helping to protect and heal is now actively engaged in partnership in their work. This, for me, is the happiest of all possible circumstances. Well, for Portland, then, I have a few suggestions, if you will permit me. May I preface these concluding remarks by saying that I moved to this city because I chose it, because its mountains, beauty, roses, musical life, and good cooking beckoned to me. An orchestra that does my favorite kind of music was good enough to trust me to run it, and they pay me to do so. I intend to live here for a long time, and I will awaken every morning to a sense of privilege at being allowed to live here. I work for a nonprofit, so I'm allowed to wear my heart on my sleeve. Every day, I seek a way to return some of the goodness that I have been given in being able to call myself an Oregonian. The former school teacher in me gives me the moxie to stand up here and tell you that I invite the same from you, my dear colleagues. Specifically, is there a philanthropy office at the Chamber of Commerce or somewhere that I don't know about? Bill? Can we create more and better direct methods of dialogue in which those of us seeking to identify and solve the problems of our beloved city can meet one another to join hands and checkbooks? 2, let us make a discussion of corporate philanthropy a top priority of all business agendas. Let the ways to lend support to the community, to add to the trust, come out before the P&L statements. 3, let's make service on boards of trustees in the community an opportunity for advancement in the company, even if your enterprises seem vastly different, Baroque music and tennis shoes or park maintenance and apparel manufacturing, whatever. Let's seek the counsel of our employees, for they will tell you the best examples of which nonprofits to support in the community. Let us think constantly of the legacy we are leaving our children, with unconscionable federal debt and dwindling natural resources because of our abuse of them. Don't we really want to create for them a city replete with green spaces, hospitals, several orchestras, affordable housing, safe neighborhoods, the chance to study piano and singing, libraries with books they will love, and all the signs of nurturing and care that mean a happy childhood? If it is not we who shall together build this for them, who is it? Nonprofits act in the name of all society to solve our common problems. If we're doing it wrong, call us and read us the riot act. If we're doing it right, send money. Thank you, dear friends, dear colleagues, for this opportunity to speak to an august body representing a city that I adore. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill Crane. We're proud to have you among us, and may you stay here a long, long time. The first question will be asked by President-elect of the City Club, Patty Bedient.
Thanks, Bill. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
I had to keep looking down to see if I had Birkenstocks or wingtips, but I think it's probably wingtips. You had mentioned the financial support and the need there for financial support, and I think oftentimes that's the way we translate the need for these nonprofit organizations is in terms of dollars. But I think as the world becomes faster and there's more and more calls for everyone's time, I wonder if you might comment on the need for volunteer effort and for the need for people's time and what you've seen happen in that area and whether you think that's impacting the nonprofits.
Thank you. One of the most important things that can be helpful to a nonprofit is the application of the remarkable skills of the business community. I think immediately of several programs in which my organization and sister organizations whose representatives I see before me are dependent. One of the best examples in Portland is RSVP, the Retired Senior Volunteer Program administered by Katrinka Easterday through Good Samaritan Hospital, in which retired professional people who have retired the bodies but not their minds are ready to come and help us with that. I would welcome any opportunity that there would be for me to send my assistant or my board members, whoever, to go into corporations and receive training from persons in business. Those are always very helpful things. Every nonprofit has to have a pro bono attorney. Every one of us needs a pro bono accountant. I see a couple of people here who do that for me. Those kinds of skills are absolutely necessary. And I think Portland comes through pretty well with that. The Oregon Business Committee for the Arts, I'm not sure who all I'm forgetting, but that's well done here.
Mark Anderson, asking the second question here, is chair of the Arts and Culture Standing Committee of the City Club. Welcome to the club and the city.
Thank you, Mark.
You've had about a year to reflect. I actually like that East Coast challenge. I think sometimes we do need to be challenged. And what I'd like you to do is actually answer two questions, if you would. The first is, what can we as a city club do to educate the corporate business community? That seems to be one of the focal points of your speech here to us today about what needs to be done to increase that level to a national norm. And the second one is a kind of a curve that Maren Alsop from the Eugene Symphony threw out at the end of her remarks earlier this spring, which is, gee, maybe we shouldn't do nonprofit, we should be for-profit organizations. Do you want to take that curve or not?
You know, her question is so good. Will you repeat the first one so I don't forget it?
Why don't you take the second one first and then I'll ask you.
Okay, thank you. Those of you who heard Maren Alsop's excellent presentation to the City Club about 6 weeks ago will remember she was very dynamic in her presentation of how we create music. She threw us a curve about why don't we turn orchestras into profit-making institutions. It's a fond notion. I'd like you to know that it's been tried. The Denver Symphony Orchestra 18 months, 2 years ago, facing financial disaster, reorganized, and the musicians of the orchestra formed a profit-making institution. They hired a presenter who basically was a man who made astronomical sums of money presenting rock and roll groups, and he put the symphony in a great sports stadium in Denver. And of course they did the 1812 overture with live cannons and that sort of thing, and it was fabulous. 25,000 people or something turned out for the first show. For the second show, 11 people came or something. You know, that's the problem. My thesis is, Mark and all of you, is that in the very nature of what we're trying to do, and let me, bear me out a couple of moments of aestheticism, which is the playing of great music is not useful. It will not make you a better accountant or shoeshine man or office administrator or something. The reason that we need great music in our lives is to take us outside of those daily sorts of concerns. And it can often be a question of taste. I don't know whether we need great country and Western music in this city or not. I think we probably do. I don't like it, and you have to drag me to country Western things, and certain kinds of rock and roll put me over the edge. What I do know is that's me judging the music, and that will always be a dialogue. What I like to look at is the music judging us. The whole of society, across the globe has determined that Bach and Beethoven and Berlioz and Stravinsky and Penderecki, that their music is great. And those things which I do not yet find to be magnificent, that's my problem, not the music's. And I'm very grateful to Bill Frank and Don Roth and Robert Bailey and people I see in this crowd who understand that our city needs great music. And I don't go as often as I need to, but and I'm not quite on the beam of your question, but let's take the 10 best corporate persons in the city and have them sit down with the budgets of any of the cultural institutions here, and if they can tell me how to turn it into a profit institution without tickets that cost $90 a piece, neat, we'll do it. Okay, first question.
I think you've given a partial answer to that first question. The first question was, what can we do as a city club to help educate corporations and businesses?
Thank you very much. I think it was said earlier, I've joined the program committee of the City Club at Kathy Oxborough's invitation, and when Kathy asked me that, I said, you do understand that you're getting a lobbyist for all things arts and cultural. I will be a pain in the neck in committee meetings. First and foremost, I think the City Club needs, as often as possible, to have people who present what art and music, when I say art, I mean presenting arts and plastic arts. We need to have art people up in front of this organization talking about what it is that we do in understandable kinds of ways. I thought Marin Alsop was the hottest speaker I heard in a long time, in years. And if we can subtly, through the programs that we present, that being, in my opinion, the most powerful tool of the City Club, if we can have people who have voices that speak to ears that hear about what art is and how it functions in our lives, I think that's how we get there. I never ask people for money. I've been a fundraiser for years, and I never ask people money. Will you give me money? And the last thing I will ever do is somehow make people feel guilty about their lack of giving or their levels of giving. There was a joke in our board meeting when I first came. I explained if $500 worth of new shoes at Nordstrom would make you feel this good, and $500 contribution to the activities of the PBO would make you feel this good, buy the shoes. What I'm much more interested in is in all of the ways that we can make people feel good about participating in those things which our community needs. I don't mean to talk too long and prevent other questions. I would like also to say Portland is blessed with the most cooperative, most collegial, most generous, most communicative set of colleagues who are administering the cultural institutions of this city that I've ever seen. If I call Robert Bailey, Don Roth, Linda McGee, Jerry Bullis, Dan Monroe, and I can go on and on and on, we get through right away. Don's mailing list man maintains our mailing list and so forth, and the arts community is already cooperating very tight to make each other successful. It ain't like that in Washington, D.C. Rocky.
Mr. Crane, thank you. Rocky Bloomhagen, City Club member. I'm also a member of the gay community, and I'm deeply concerned about the Oregon Citizens Alliance hate-mongering. And with your experience with the Whitman Walker Clinic, if you can shed any insight on how we might be able to involve corporate giving in this attack of lies and hate, if you can respond.
Thank you for asking the question publicly, Rocky. You've also asked me that question privately, at least in some other fashion. I haven't a clue, and I cannot respond to your question. What I would do, were I you in your position, and what I will do for you if you ask me to do it, is I would go see Lon Mabon. I'd just call him up and say, can I come see you, and talk to him. I don't know. I do not believe that I do not believe that the Oregon Citizens Alliance is meeting a perceived need in this community. I think that that is one of those institutions which is largely driven by the egos of its founders, and that they have an agenda which is not arising out of a perceived community need. And I'm not certain that I understand how we would raise money for either side.
Jay Formick, City Club member. Mr. Crane, what obligation do federal, state, and local governments have to support your programs, any nonprofit programs? And I'm sure that you've had discussions with corporate leaders. I'm wondering if you have any insight on what the corporate leaders' expectations are as well.
You've asked me a question while Bill Bulick of the Metropolitan Arts Commission is sitting here. What I'd like to say a couple of things in preface before responding directly to the question about what should government support be of the performing arts, by saying that in this country we have a bit of a unique circumstance, which is that the amount of money that actually supports the arts is a tiny little bitty amount of money for which we have to create an amount of paperwork and exasperating, I have to learn how to run Excel to get all of the spreadsheets together for piddling sums of money. And that has nothing to do with how those bureaucracies are created and how they are run, because the Metropolitan Arts Commission is run like a new sewing machine. It's excellent, with excellent leadership in its executive director and assistant and staff. It's just that I think that the political agenda of our representation, both in the states and in the federal government, sees funding of the arts as an opportunity to buy a political hunk that can offset something else. It is my strong conviction that the flap over the National Endowment for the Arts last year, the Jesse Helms, all of that kind of stuff, was never about art and certainly not about morality. It was much more about incumbents having good copy for their constituent newsletters in order to gain more votes. I don't think that those people cared a great deal about 2 photographs, only one of which was worth looking at. I was educated in my advanced education in France. I had a great grade point average in undergrad and grad school, never got a dime. Went to France to study and got full scholarship, and after I did that. In other countries, there are, particularly in Europe, in the European Economic Community now, the amount of money applied for art is enormously higher than it is in the United States. The thing that comes with that is an even squinchier kind of control of artistic freedom and how you align. You have to take exactly the right exams and exactly the right kind of curricula. What I would like to see is that somehow we could create funding of the arts which says these are institutions fulfilling a need and they are held in the public trust and we trust them. Because of course, what came out of the National Endowment for the Arts controversy last year is now that half of that money is being very specifically targeted for education and for certain kinds of musical education or artistic education. And so we're all running around trying to create projects that make it seem like we're educating more.
Ted Kay, City Club member. I see they've gone to a lot of effort to give you a piano and you got to play 37 notes. Could you give us a 2-minute lecture on Baroque and use the piano again?
Oh boy. Well, with Nancy Hadeen's permission, because she told me I only got 10 notes and I played 11, not counting that it was octaves. Thank you, that's a nice question. Baroque music is that period in history, basically from 1600 to 1750, whose leading guys are Bach and Handel and Scarlatti, and it's very much characterized by balance and a controlled kind of emotional context. And if it's an orchestra playing, the cello, the bass, and the harpsichord's left hand are all playing the same thing. That's called continuo. So if I have written in the cello and the bass, the harpsichord might play. for instance, to go on top of the bass. And the other instruments are creating filigree along with that, and voices can enter into that. But it's very stable and very balanced. It includes at times the most sublime and most amazing of qualities. It's the most popular music that's sold in the United States. Baroque recordings outstrip other kinds of music in classical record sales 3-1. And what you probably don't know about us, unless you've read recently, the musical instruments used in the 18th century were very different from modern instruments. The violins had strings made of animal insides instead of steel. They play at a lower pitch. They're softer and easier. The bow is shaped different, and the sound is very, very, very different from the modern sound. And the Portland Baroque Orchestra plays those early instruments. About half of our instruments are authentic. There's a woman sitting here whose violin, she's a member of the orchestra, and her violin is from 1749, for instance. Our orchestra, like genuine 18th century orchestras, stand to play, and where a symphony would typically have 90 players for big romantic music, we have about 18. So it's a little livelier and so forth. Thanks for the question.
Jay Formick, City Club member again. I've got another kind of dry question.
That's okay.
What do you see as the trends of corporate giving in Portland? You've been here for a year. You've had your finger on the pulse. Where do you see corporate giving headed in the Portland metro area?
Because of Measure 5, which has thrown everybody into a blue-green panic, whether in their particular area of delivery of services, it's really panic time or not. It is, for instance, in the artistic community. What I see is going to happen in the direction that corporate giving will head, because people will plead for it, is that social services and health care, particularly to the elderly, those being the areas of service in the metropolitan area which were heavily government funded in geriatric concerns and health care for the poor and so forth, and abused women and services to delinquent juveniles, those areas got their funding taken away, having been run by boards of trustees who never had to fundraise, because 100% or 90% or whatever, the grave majority of funding came directly from the government, and suddenly they're getting 50%, and one day walked into a board meeting and said, oh Lord, we've got to raise money. And so they are now headed toward the corporations to try to find the money that used to come automatically. I would say probably corporate giving is going to head more heavily in delivery of social services.
Hello, Bob Bridgeford, City Club member, and since I didn't have my Birkenstocks, I'm also the director of the 12th largest nonprofit in the state at this point. That's not such a good statistic because last year we were the 15th, and we didn't raise any more money. We just lost 3 competitors this year and moved up by attrition. The Arts 2000 plan mentions that there are 35,000 small businesses, maybe less than a dozen big corporate givers who are very stressed by all of us constantly approaching them, to the point where their average grant has dropped down into the $1,000 to $5,000 range instead of the $15,000 to $20,000 range you might find in a community with a healthier corporate community simply in quantity. Do you have any suggested strategies for approaching these 38,000 small businesses, which are seemingly our large opportunity? You mentioned at one point graciously that we're not so bad, that 5% is the national average and we're at 3% of corporate giving. But of course, if 5% is 100%, 3% is 60%, so we have that 40% opportunity to approach the corporate committee and the corporate community that we should really be taking advantage of. Do you have any strategies in mind on how we might reach those small businesses?
Thank you. Nice question. I do. I think I need to preface it by saying that I believe that all of us in nonprofit administration keep making the same, not all of us, many of us in nonprofit administration keep making the same stupid mistake, which is we call up businesses when we want money. And we've not taken the time to let people know what it is that we're doing, to invest them with a sense of owning a piece of the rock. And the only time that we communicate with them is when we need some funding. And I have a very simple strategy. You know, in my case, I have presentation of concerts, and fortunately they're recorded and we can use cassettes and we have printed materials. But I ask those businesses to come to concerts. And one of the things that I do, just because I'm a mean guy, is I don't allow any complimentary tickets. I make board members buy the tickets of the people that they're bringing, and that means that they'll get there. And I think that we need increasingly to involve the corporate community, individuals from the corporate community, in what we're actually doing, and let them hear our music, let them see young teenage women who have had unfortunate circumstances in their lives who are now rejoicing in helping to build their own communities for their younger sisters and so forth, and say to them, don't you want to be a part of this? And if that sounds overly philosophical and somehow kind of fluffy and airheaded, what my experience in the field and what the best books that I read say is there ain't any other way.
Bill Crane, once again, thank you very much. We've had
Pleasure,
a
Chief.
wonderful time. As we adjourn, let's once again thank Bill.